Hello, we're looking at the map of the board game Supply Lines of the American Revolution, the Northern Theater. The game is published by Hollandspiele Games and it's still available for purchase on their website for a reasonable price. Unlike the previous previous game I looked at on this channel, Baron Victory, Supply Lines of the American Revolution is available for purchase. It's a strategic level game about as the title suggests, the Northern Theater of the American Revolution. And my ultimate goal is to do a series of playthrough videos of the game. One reason being that there's very little coverage of this game on YouTube. But before I can do a playthrough, I think there's a couple of crucial things that I need to I think in order to follow any kind of playthrough, I think the viewer will need to have a few crucial ideas explained to begin with, and so I'm going to do a pair of videos to accomplish those goals. And so what this video will be a discussion of how to construct supply lines in the game and how to move armies in the game, both with a purpose of ultimately facilitating battle, and winning battles and taking spaces away from the opposing side. And then in the second preliminary video we'll look at the battle sequence in detail, and then once we do those things, I think once someone has watched someone who isn't already familiar with the game, once they watch those two preliminary videos, then they'll be in a much better position to enjoy the subsequent playthrough video. So without further ado, let's start talking about the specifics of the game. As you can see or probably guess, it's what would normally be called a point-to-point map. All this, there are three kinds of spaces on the map. There are these unnamed square-shaped spaces, which the game calls points. There are these pink rectangular ones that have names. These are cities like Cambridge, Falmouth, Providence, Stonington are all cities in the game. Boston is there. And then these yellow rectangular spaces or areas are forts. In this video, we won't discuss the difference between forts and cities. The basic markers of the game, the ones that represent military forces, are, first of all, the game calls these units. I'll use the term units or strength points. So all these counters with a soldier on them and a number are units. Then this top unit here, the one with the tricorn hat, that's what a leader looks like. So right now there's just one leader on the board. The leader is in Albany. Leaders don't have names in this game. And then the other kind of basic component of the game are supply cubes. They come in two colors. I call them cubes because in the physical copy of the game they're wooden cubes. The green ones are called food cubes, and they're used to initiate the movement of military forces. And then the yellow cubes are called war supplies or war cubes, and they are used to purchase battle dice. And then so in a battle, each side uses battle supplies or war supplies to buy battle dice, and then there's a roll-off of the battle dice, and that determines the losses in the battle and the ultimate winner of the battle. In this game, the term army refers to any stack of units, whether or not it has a leader. That took me bit of time to get used to, just because in a lot of games about strategic level games about the American Revolution or the American Civil War, an army refers to a stack of units or strength points together with a leader. But that's not what the term army means in this game. An army is just a stack of one or more units or strength points, which may or may not contain a leader. Uh, so, so I'll use the term army or stack interchangeably. So just be aware that whenever I say army, I don't. Armies don't have to have a leader with them like they do in other games of a similar topic. One really crucial concept in this game, as you might imagine from the title, is the concept of a supply line in the game. So I've zoomed in on the portion of the map that we'll be looking at in more detail. And this is a standard kind of point-to-point map, where so the different areas of the map are connected by in this case these brown lines. And so these two spaces are considered to be connected or adjacent or whatever term you want to use. And then a supply line in this game is the game defines it a bit more formally, but what it boils down to is any connected series of areas, all of which are occupied by armies of the same side. So there's a supply line between Albany and this space here because they're connected, and because there's an army of the same, there's a continental army in both spaces as well. There's a supply line from this point here to Morristown for the same reason, and then as is standard, Albany and Morristown are considered to be connected in virtue of them both being connected to this point. And then, so there's also a supply line between Albany and Morristown because, again, there's a series of two or more connected areas, and all of which are occupied by units of the same side. There's not a supply line between Cambridge and Boston because while they are connected, they're not both occupied by they're occupied by armies of different sides, and so there is not a supply line between Boston and Cambridge, and there's not a supply line between Albany and this point because while the point is connected to Albany, there are no blue forces, no blue units in this point, so there is no supply line. And the point of having supply lines in this game is, I'm putting it a bit simply, but supply can be moved at will, really, by the owning player throughout a supply line. So I can move supply immediately in game terms from Morristown to Albany because there's a supply line connecting them. Now there are limits as to the like the carrying capacity, as it were, of a supply line. Cities and forts can hold up to 8 supply cubes of either kind. The distinction between green cubes and white cubes don't matter when you're thinking about carrying capacity. So both Albany and Morristown are at their current carrying capacity because they have 8 supply cubes in them. And then points that are unoccupied cannot have any cubes in them whatsoever. The only way there can be supply cubes in a point is if they're carried by the army that is in the point. And the carrying capacity of an army in a point is 1 plus the number of units or strength points in the army. So this army here, this army of 1 strength point, is at its carrying capacity because it's currently carrying 2 supply cubes. And I should probably, I do want to emphasize that that in a supply line like this, the cubes that are, so to speak, in, well, that are in this area really are being carried, as it were, by the city, not by the army in the city. I mean, there's just one strength point here. But because this one strength point is in the city, it's not if you must speak about it in these terms, it's not the way the game talks about it, but you're not limited to having two supply cubes in this area because it's a city. Really, the game wants you to think of it in terms of that the supply is in the city, not being carried by the army. An army is only carrying supplies either when it's occupying a point or when it moves into the defender space for a battle. We'll talk more about that subsequently. So with that hopefully useful explanation, let's move on now to the topic of moving armies and building supply lines for the purposes of bringing about advantageous combats. Right now, and this isn't exactly what you would see in in the opening terms of a game, but it does mirror it somewhat in that we have a strong Patriot army in Cambridge and a strong British army in Boston. Right now, the Patriots have an advantage. They've got 11 units or strength points in Cambridge, and Boston has 9. And the way victory, I'll talk more about this in the playthrough video, but very briefly, the way, or probably the most important way, the American player, the continental player, makes progress towards victory is attacking and defeating British armies. And in a battle, the victorious side is the side with the most units at the end of the battle. So right now, and in this game, an advantage of I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but essentially in this game, or very often in this game, an advantage of 2 units is a huge advantage. So the continental side would really like to attack Boston right now, but it's limited by a couple of things. One is that it doesn't have a leader. There's no leader in Cambridge, and in this game you can only attack your opponent if you have a leader counter in the attacking army. And so right now I as the continental player cannot attack Boston for that reason. And the other reason is that I don't have any food or war supplies in Cambridge. I'll need both to attack Boston. I'll need food supplies to activate my army, and then I'll need war supplies to buy battle dice to initiate the battle. And so what I'm going to illustrate here is how I can build a supply line essentially from Albany to Cambridge that will both allow the movement of the leader from Albany to Cambridge and also allow the movement of supplies from this supply chain here into Cambridge. I should probably also say in this game leaders cannot move by themselves. They have to move with one or more units. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to build a supply line from Albany to Cambridge and move the leader into Cambridge, and then the supply line will allow me to move what supplies I need to get into Cambridge to launch the attack. So first step is I want to build a supply line from Albany to this point. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, how are you going to do that because you don't have any food in Albany? So how are you going to activate this army? Well, the crucial rule in this game about supply lines is that you can move supplies at will along a supply line during your impulse. So right now we're imagining it's the continental player's impulse. And you are allowed to temporarily violate the the capacity, the supply capacities along the supply line in order to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, and in activating armies, you spend 1 green cube per 4 or less units or strength points. So the first step in my impulse here is I'm going to move 1 green cube. I can take it from here up to Albany, temporarily overstacking supply, as it were, here. But now I'm going to spend it. And now I've activated this army. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the leader here and the 3 strength points here into the point, leaving 1 strength point here in Albany. And the reason I'm leaving 1 strength point here in Albany, I would not required to leave it there. The rules don't require that I do that, but I'm going to do it because I want to have a supply line between this point and Albany, and subsequently all the way down to Morristown. And so that's my impulse. Now I'll imagine the British player does something in another portion of the map, so now it's my impulse again. So essentially I'm just going to keep doing what I did before. So at the first stage of my impulse, I'll move 1 supply cube to this point and then spend it to activate this stack. So I'm going to leave 1 strength point behind. And move 2 strength points or units to the next point along with the leader. Whoops, I cloned there, didn't I? Leaving 1 strength point behind in the hex, and now I have a supply line stretching from this army all the way down to Morristown. Now it's the British player's impulse, and they do something somewhere else on the map. Final step, I spend 1 more, I move 1 strength point all the way along the supply line to this army, immediately spend it. And now I've achieved my goal of having a supply line stretching all the way from Cambridge to Albany, and all of these war supplies, and all the way down to Morristown, and all of these food supplies. And if I wanted to, as part of my impulse, I could immediately move cubes up to the carrying capacity of Cambridge. Now I wouldn't have to do it that way, but if I thought there was any risk of my supply line being cut, like if there was a British force, say in Fort Ticonderoga, that could, take this space and then break the supply line, if there's any danger of that, I would want to move everything I need to move here. So I would want to move both, as it turns out, 3 supply cubes here, because I'll need 3 supplies to activate all those forces, 3 food supplies, and then I'll want to move at least 4 war supplies into Cambridge, and I can do that as part of my impulse. And then I would be in a position the next turn to launch my attack from Cambridge to Boston. So notice what this way of moving units and supplies accomplishes is it maximizes the number of and the distance supplies can be moved across the map at the expense of of lowering the number of strength points you actually bring into like the launching pad, as it were, of the subsequent battle. I started with 4 in Albany, 4 strength points, but I had to leave 3 of them behind to build my supply line, and so I was only able to bring 1 strength point with my leader into Cambridge itself. Now, it turned out that given the initial distribution of units in Cambridge and Boston, it was a lot more important for me to get as much supply into Cambridge as I could, rather than the number of strength points. Rather than maximize the number of strength points in Cambridge. But of course, not every situation starts out that way. So let's look at another kind of situation that you can face in the game. And a lot of the situations that you face, are going to fall into broadly one of these 2 categories. So let's just back everything up. Pardon why I just clicked through everything. All right, and so we're going to start by just making one change here. Let's see, we've got 9 here, right? So let's start with, well, we'll start with 9. It doesn't really matter. So, other than that, it's exactly the same situation. Now there are equal number of forces between Cambridge and Boston. So the continental player does not have as it were, like an initial unit or strength point advantage going in. Well, actually, I should make some more changes. Just let's put. Oops. Let's. Sorry, I'm flubbing this. I need to add, let's see. I need to add cubes. Oh, here we go. To make this a little realistic. So we'll put 4 in here. And we'll put some food in there too. All right. So Cambridge is starting out well supplied. But what I'm lacking, if I want to attack Boston, what I'm lacking is, first of all, a leader, and second of all, enough strength points for it to, make it worth my while to attack. Because in this game, if at the end of the battle the size of the attacking and defending forces are equal, then the defender wins the battle. So in order to win a battle in Boston launch from Cambridge, I've got to get a few more units or strength points into Cambridge. So here's how I can do that using my army in Albany and the supply line I have stretching from Albany to Morristown. So the first step will be to, as before, to activate my army in Albany. So I'll move a supply and then immediately spend it. So now I've activated. And so I'm going to move the entire army this time. I'm not going to leave behind a strength point in Albany. I'm going to move the entire army, so I'll just do that now. And the carrying capacity of this army is 5 cubes because I've got 4 units or 4 strength points in the army. So um, so so this army is going to, and initially, I mean, I already moved the pieces. The army was carrying its supply when it made that move. So what I'm going to bring is, what I need to do is I need to bring at least one, I need to bring at least 2 food cubes with the army so I can activate first here and then here to get it here. So I definitely want to make sure to bring at least 2 food cubes. And then it's allowed to bring up to 5. So let's bring one more food cube and 2 more supply. And that's the end of my impulse. So now the British do their impulse. Now it's my impulse again, and I just keep, and I do the same thing I did before, or pretty much the same thing. Now, of course, I don't have a supply line from my army to Albany and these spaces, so I'm restricted. So the only supply this army has access to is the supply that it's carrying with it. So I'm going to spend one of the food cubes to activate the army, and the entire army will move here, carrying its supply with it. And then that's the end of my impulse. The British do their impulse. Now it's my impulse. I do this one more time. Whoops. And the army brings its supply with it, puts it in Cambridge. Notice that I'm 1 over the limit, and I don't have a supply line to any from Cambridge to any other space, so I would have to eliminate one of those supply. Oops, I keep doing that. Because a city or a fort cannot carry more than a maximum of 8 supplies. So now I've accomplished my goal of having a force in Cambridge significantly larger than the one in Boston. In this case, 4 larger? Yeah, 4 larger. So I'm going to be guaranteed a victory when I attack Boston. I've got a leader in Cambridge, so now I'm eligible to launch an attack. And finally, I've got 3 food cubes, which will allow me to activate 12 of the forces in Cambridge, which will be more than enough to guarantee a victory against 9 British units, because I won't go into the details, because the British player does not have enough war supplies to cause 3 losses here in the Continental Army to equalize the number of units in the 2 armies at the end of the battle. So again, when you're playing the game, you're gonna always be, deciding between, you're always going to be like thinking about moving your forces, and you're always going to be making decisions about, do I need to, well, you're going to ask, what am I prioritizing here? Do I need to move supply in order to, win the battles that I want to win, or do I need to move units? And based on your answer to that question, you're going to be taking one of the 2 approaches I've outlined here. So I hope this video will be useful to anyone interested in the game, and anyone who watches my subsequent playthrough video. So again, my next video will be another short one, or shorter, I hope, where I illustrate I go through the battle sequence in detail.